Hi, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know we don't have everyone here, but just in the interest of time, I would like to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Bezaga Rihanna. I am the Community Engagement Lead Coordinator at Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. Let me turn on my video so we can all see me. I would like to welcome you all to this webinar, COVID-19 vaccine boosters, vaccine for children and new variants. This is part of our Ask the Expert series. We've actually previously done a version of this presentation before, and so we're doing an update version of that right now. So for those of you who are not familiar with Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, just a brief background on WRAIR. So WRAIR mission is really to support soldier readiness and health. We've been working alongside civilian researchers, medical professionals, and military personnel to develop and test products used in reducing the diseases that impact the world. So the community engagement, this program is part of our WRAIR community engagement outreach efforts to improving community knowledge on WRAIR COVID-19 research and its impact locally. We launched our CE program in October of 2020, aiming to engage communities that have been greatly affected by the COVID virus. And this, as I've said, this Ask the Expert series is part of our broader community engagement effort, which takes, multidisciplinary approach to understanding the community's needs to promote equity and inclusion in our vaccine research. So before we get started, a few logistics. If you have joined one of our online workshops before, you know that my role today is going to be to facilitate the behind the scene logistics so that our session goes more smoothly. So you will see me jumping in throughout the webinar, fielding some of your questions and interjecting with some comments. You'll also see my colleague Jael and Kim in the chat box supporting with any technical or other needs that you may have. So with that said, here at WRAIR CE team, we're really committed to making our programs meaningful and engaging. And we know that learning requires reflection and interaction. So we really highly encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. The great thing about virtual learning is that it's not rude to ask questions while the speaker is speaking because you have the chat tool. So with that in mind, when you are sending a question, I highly encourage you to select the all attendees or panelists list, so that way we can all see your comments and questions. Last but not least, any resources that are shared today, including the PowerPoint, links to any research that we refer to, would be emailed to you, and also the recording will be emailed to you after the program. So last but not least, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our wonderful speaker, Dr. Brittany Ober-Shepherd, who's going to be covering today's presentation. Dr. Shepherd is a research physician with the Emergent Infectious Disease Branch at Walter Reed Army Institute of Research and works with HJF, Henry Jackson Foundation for the Advancement of Military Medicine. She contributes to broader project portfolios that range from public health to preclinical studies for COVID and yellow fever. So it's really a pleasure to have her doing this talk for us. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to you, Dr. Shepherd.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So thank you for attending this conversation on COVID-19 and clinical research. So it's a pleasure to be here with you. So today we have a spectrum of viewers in the audience, including nurses, hospital staff, scientists, employees from the Henry M. Jackson Foundation. And so this talk is intended to be directed at a non-scientific audience, and primarily so that our medical staff today can help the community that they're serving and even get their personal questions answered. So with that, I will move on. So full disclaimer is that opinions and assertions that are expressed in this talk are not reflective of the Department of Defense or the Henry M. Jackson Foundation. Okay, and so this right here is the overview of the presentation in general. So my goal is to get through the end of vaccines for children. My hope is that we are able to go through the myths, some common myths and misconceptions that lots of people have, whether it's yourself or even people that you might see in the clinic or that you're trying to help out. And so being able to review those, I think, is helpful because it's it's tremendous when you're able to counsel people and kind of direct them towards the right information. And so COVID has consumed all of our lives one way or another over the past couple of years. So it's everywhere. It's in the news and restaurant policies, it's on Facebook, and not to mention if you or someone gets sick. And so it's become a little part of our life on a daily basis. So hopefully, these are the most relevant topics that we can go over at this point in time. But information moves very quickly. Oh, I can't get the presentation to move forward. There we go. Okay, so let's start by focusing on the process and the basics of COVID-19 vaccines and how they're made. So right now there are 3 vaccines that are available to the United States public. There's Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson. So Pfizer and Moderna are the mRNA vaccines that require 2 doses, while Johnson & Johnson is a vectored vaccine which only requires 1 dose. Pfizer has received the full FDA approval down to age 16 and has emergency use authorization now from the ages 5 years and up. Moderna and Johnson & Johnson have emergency use authorization from the FDA for ages 18 and up. So as of yesterday, 71% of the United States population has had at least 1 dose. So we're slowly getting there. It's unlikely that we'll get entirely to 100%, but we're slowly creeping up. So during the phase 3 trial, for those that are currently available, about 30 to 45,000 received at least 1 dose. And since then, hundreds of millions of people have received the vaccine in the United States, as you can see. So 3.5 billion shots have been given worldwide, if not more at this point. So we have the best data in such a short amount of time that we've ever had for a vaccine. So many people are afraid that the vaccines they're too new and that they may trigger unexpected or life-threatening side effects, perhaps even months or years later, and that's understandable. So it's true that reports of new side effects can sometimes take months to emerge as a vaccine goes from populations of thousands in clinical trials to millions in the real world, as we're encountering natural variations and human responses along the way. But more than 100 million Americans have already passed that point, certainly with adults and increasingly more children since we surpassed the clinical trials, that point in their vaccine, that sort of give us a lot of data and a lot of information for participants who have had the vaccine for over a year at this point. So far, incidents of severe side effects, and this is primarily focused on adults right here, for coronavirus vaccines are things like Guillain-Barré syndrome, where people can feel numbness and tingling in their legs in mild form, and even a little bit more severe numbness or even, challenges with walking as it gets more, as it could progress. Heart inflammation, which is known as myocarditis, both of those are rare. And they're discovered very quickly because they were on official lists of potential problems to watch for. What's more is that all these and other side effects appear soon after someone has taken the vaccine, suggesting that people don't need to necessarily worry about delayed long-term reactions. So this picture fits with the modern history of vaccines, which shows that most new immunizations have been incredibly safe. And even the most severe effects have reared their ugly heads right away. So side effects nearly always occur within a couple of weeks of a person being vaccinated. And the concerns that something will spring up later with COVID-19 vaccines are not impossible. But like I said, based on what we know right now, particularly in adults who have been vaccinated for nearly a year at this point, it's not very likely. A key reason for this is that the limited window of side effects is that the short time all vaccines stay in our body. So unlike some medicines that people take every day or on a weekly basis, vaccines are generally administered once or a handful of times over a lifetime. And in the case of Pfizer and Moderna, the mRNA molecules used in these vaccines are very fragile. And so they're out of your body in a day or so. With COVID-19, regulators have added several extra pairs of eyes to watch for these adverse events and report them as quickly as possible. So that way they can be recognized and any really severe effects can be hindered. So the comparator to getting the vaccine is what are the effects of COVID-19 disease itself? How likely am I to get that in comparison? So in comparison, the risk of some of the most worrisome side effects for any of the vaccines is much less than the risk of death, let alone hospitalization, or the risk of long-term effects that people are seeing with long COVID. Death is much less common than either hospitalization or long COVID. And so the vaccines certainly add, they provide that sort of benefit for preventing or lowering the odds that you would be hospitalized or someone you love or somebody that you're caring for would be hospitalized or even die. And so the risk of these rare side effects, which could include anaphylaxis, blood clots, the heart inflammation, it's expected that the risks of those, outweigh, the benefit of the vaccine outweighs the risk of those happening. And in comparison to COVID-19, the side effects and possibly long-term side effects of having had COVID-19 are much worse. And so how do vaccines work? So vaccines work by teaching the body to recognize an invader, such as SARS-CoV-2. And so this sounds an alarm in the body, calling the spider cells and proteins that are part of our immune system into action. So ultimately, this will help the body to prevent or control an infection and reduce the severity of disease by generating what is called an immune response. And so, as you know, we have two types of COVID-19 vaccines that are available: mRNA vaccines, which are for Pfizer and Moderna, and a DNA vaccine, Johnson & Johnson. And so I'll go over in a little bit of detail how these work. So mRNA vaccines. This is the first time mRNA vaccines have been available to the mass public, but they've actually been around for decades. So to give you an idea of how they work, I'll walk you through the first steps. On the left, you have the SARS-CoV-2 virus, so the virus that causes COVID-19. The little red legs that are projecting off of it are called the spike protein. This is the part of virus that we've found to be the most vulnerable and has been the main target for vaccines and other therapeutics. So the spike is turned into something called mRNA, which is something your body makes all the time. It's the blueprint from your DNA that is used to create the proteins found all over your body. So for the vaccine, scientists created the virus's mRNA or instructions on how to make the spike protein. And so this set of instruction is then put inside an oily bubble or a lipid bubble we sometimes call, so that it can get into the muscles of your body. So the mRNA vaccines are composed of many of these tiny little oily particles with mRNA inside of them. So someone receives the injection, the particles enter a human cell. Each one of our cells has multiple factories in them that receive the mRNA messages all the time. This time, these factories receive a blueprint on how to make the spike protein. So it produces the spike protein and then takes it outside of the cell so that it can be distributed or send messages. However, your body's not any old factory, so it's a military factory. And there are all sorts of security and quality control checks. The security agents of your body notice, this doesn't look like something the body usually makes, and sets off an alarm. So this alarm brings whatever combat cells or special operations your body can provide to get rid of this product. So the antibodies produced that combat this are the special forces of your body. So they're trained to get rid of the threat, and they do. These antibodies or combatants then remember this threat, and so any subsequent exposure will mobilize them very quickly. So booster shots in this way act as sort of a fire drill, providing practice and instilling a longer-term memory against these threats. So DNA vaccines, which is like the Johnson & Johnson one, act differently. I didn't note on the previous slide, but the mRNA vaccines do not enter the nucleus of your cell, nor do they modify your DNA in any way. The DNA vaccines also do not modify the DNA in your body, but they do interact with your cell's nucleus where it is held. So the DNA vaccines are weakened cold virus, known as an adenovirus, it's a weakened common cold virus, which we often can call an adenovirus. So scientists have used the virus's natural ability to get into cells and to create these common colds on a regular basis to create a vaccine. So the virus goes into your cells and puts the DNA of the spike protein into the nucleus. While the DNA is put into the nucleus, it does not integrate into your own DNA. That's very important. Instead, it makes the spike protein DNA available so that it can use your body's machinery to then translate it. So, as I said, using your body's machinery, it then translates it into mRNA, and it goes through the process that we just previously described, using the factories and special ops forces to create antibodies against the target. So, common concern that we hear, circulating amongst the public and, maybe even at the pit of your own stomach is, why has this been shortened during COVID-19 and should I be worried about it? It's important to emphasize that while this has been, the timeline has been shrunk considerably from, I'm sure you've heard that oftentimes this process can take 10 years. We've been able to do this in a year. Why is that the case? And so this time it was much faster because the government cleared the pathway of bureaucracy. They added a lot of money, lots and lots of money, actually, so that companies could focus only on developing the vaccines. This is not usually the case. Usually, the government has their hands in many pots and doing different things. Companies are the same, money is spread a little bit more thin, but in this case, it was all hands on deck and really all money on deck. So as a result, people were working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and steps were able to be overlapped. It's important to note that in some parts of overlapping steps, there was a certain amount of risk that the government and pharmaceuticals companies were willing to make. For instance, with the COVID-19 vaccine, they started producing the vaccine when the phase 3 was only partially complete. This was a financial risk for the government and the pharmaceutical companies. They started making this expensive product ready to deploy in the event that the phase 3 trial, when all said and done, showed that the vaccine was successful. But there was also still a risk that it wasn't going to be successful, and they weren't going to distribute it if it wasn't. Since the data could have gone in another direction, they decided to put their chips on the table and say, okay, let's move forward. So with that in mind, there could have been a huge financial loss, but I think in this scenario, the bets were good. And a lot of those good bets were made because there's a lot of science that had happened prior to the pandemic happened that raised their confidence in this kind of vaccine technology. And so for this, a lot of questions come up then related to both herd immunity and natural infection, herd immunity and vaccines. And so if I can, I'm going to use this link because I like this animation. And so this gives a really great idea about how herd immunity works. And, anybody, when the PowerPoint's distributed, anybody's welcome to use that if they feel like that this helps them or their patients or somebody else that they're treating. But how do vaccines protect the community? So herd immunity occurs when enough people become immune to a disease and make it spread unlikely. So as a result, the entire community is protected, even when those who are not themselves immune are. Even those who are not themselves immune. So herd immunity is usually achieved through vaccination, but it can occur in, to some extent with natural infection. And that's something that is at this point very controversial within the scientific community and just very actively being researched. But you can say that, can show here that with vaccination, you get a very potent and early opportunity to gain herd immunity. And as you can see, the different percentage of people who are vaccinated. So, in the top left corner, for those who are 0% vaccination, you can see how the red connecting dots, which is the spread of, say, COVID-19, goes rapidly. If you get up to 95% vaccinated, we'll say fully vaccinated, you can see how much more slowly that this moves and progresses, and how this then protects even those few that are unvaccinated, which are the blue dots in the bottom right corner. And so vaccines are an extremely important tool, for achieving this very quickly. Okay, so before moving on to COVID-19 variants, we'll give an opportunity for questions. So Beza, you're welcome to take the lead on this one.
Yep. If you guys have any questions, please type them in the chat box. We have one here: myocarditis in children. Why do you think it develops? And is it only Moderna or other vaccines as well?
Yeah, so we're actually going to we'll be going over that in probably the last section where we go over vaccines with children. But I understand that that's a really big concern, especially when we're taking care of these, little people, and, we're being asked to decide whether to give them a vaccine. So if you could hold on just a moment, I think that in probably 20 minutes or so, I'll be able to answer that question more fully. Any others?
No, that was it for this session, so we can move on.
Yeah. So I'll pause at various intervals, so there'll be more information and more opportunities for questions. Okay. So then moving on, we'll go ahead and move on to variants. So the world is very worried about coronavirus variants. And so as the virus mutates, which all viruses do, variant strains emerge. And so some of these variants are more effective at infecting humans and may even cause more severe disease. With luck, though, variants also emerge that cause more mild disease as well. So how does a mutated version of the virus improve its chances of being transmitted to humans? So I want to show you this sort of 3-minute video to demonstrate. As a note, I love this video. I'll give you a sense that it will remind you of a children's TV show, but I think that it discusses variants in a way that I think anybody can understand. They use analogies such as high fives and other strategies for getting to the cell, and so it's a way that you can explain it to anybody. And so that's why I like it. I think it's a great tool when you're counseling people.
Hey, Dr. Shepherd, do you want me to share the video?
Oh, sure. Can it be?
I can play it now if you'd like me to.
Oh, yes, please.
Okay.
Let me know if I need to stop sharing. I was already playing it, but I don't think it was being shared.
variants, and there are a lot of them spreading around the world. Some are more contagious and possibly more deadly. What in the heck is going on with all these variants? To answer that question, let's go back in time to January 2020 when we were all blissfully going about our lives. Back then, the coronavirus looked a bit like this. Well, not really, but if it was made of puzzle pieces, it would look like this. The virus is basically a ball with little spikes on the surface poking out. Now, our cells aren't stupid. They don't let just any virus inside willy-nilly. The cell goes to great lengths to keep intruders out. For anything to enter, the intruder must figure out a way for its spike to bind to another spike on the cell's surface. You can think of this binding as a secret handshake, and the handshake tells the cell, "Hey cell, it's okay, you can let him inside." That's exactly what SARS-CoV-2 has done. Sometime in 2019, probably in China, it figured out a way to interact with a specific spike on the surface of human cells. This interaction wasn't perfect, but the binding was good enough to trick the cell's receptor. And the receptor mistakenly told the cell, "Hey cell, this guy is friendly. We can let him inside." Ooh, big mistake. Once the virus was inside, it made a bunch of copies of itself, busted the cell wide open, and released new virus particles inside the blood, which went out and found another cell to infect. During this time, the body isn't standing by idly letting this attack occur. Oh no! The immune system is already preparing a counterattack. It's manufacturing antibodies. Some of those antibodies act like little caps that stick to the ends of the virus's spike, like this. Once capped, the spikes can no longer stick to the cell's receptor. The infection can't move forward and the body wins. That's pretty much how coronavirus infections played out for about 9 months or so. Then, in September 2020, the virus got crafty and the pandemic began a new phase. Every time the virus copies itself inside a cell, it has the chance of mutating or changing its genes slightly. Most of the mutations are actually harmful to the virus. They disable it, so these mutations disappear. But every so often, the virus happens upon a set of mutations that actually help the virus. In the case of the new variants, the mutations change the shape of the virus's spike in a particular way so that it fits better to the ACE2 receptor, so the spike can bind more tightly to the cell or more quickly. The result? A person's cells get infected more easily, or more of their cells let the virus inside. We don't really know why, but that person may make more virus particles inside their nose and upper respiratory system. So when they sneeze, cough, or just talk, they expel more virus, and that's likely why the new variant is more contagious. But wait, what about those antibodies? What about the little caps on the spike? Aren't they coming to save us again? Well, yes and no. Turns out, some of the mutations change the shape of the virus's spike in a way that's double trouble for the cell. Some antibodies no longer fit well to the end of the spike, so they can't form the little caps that block viral infection. As scientists say, these mutations help the virus evade the immune system. So a person who is infected with the older version of the virus may not be protected as well against these new variants, and that person may be more likely to be reinfected. Now, antibodies are a diverse crew. They come in a lot of different shapes, which can bind to a lot of different parts of the virus. All these other antibodies can help take down the virus and reduce infections. So even though some antibodies become less helpful, others, hopefully, will take up the slack and still get the job done, or at least stall the infection long enough until the body can make new antibodies that fit perfectly on the mutated spike.
All right, thank you, Beza. I'll go ahead and share my screen now. Okay, so as I said, I really enjoy that video because I think it's so easy to understand and it's very easy to explain to anybody that's in your life, regardless of their age. And, it gives a sense of what role the vaccines can play with variants, even if the vaccines aren't perfect for the different variants that arise. So a question also that we're always asking ourselves then is, will new variants arise? The answer is yes. So every time the virus infects someone is a new opportunity for it to mutate in a way that will either help or hurt the virus. So just after the Thanksgiving holiday, we were introduced to a new variant of concern. So this variant emerged very rapidly in South Africa, and it sounded off international alarms. So as you can see here, this variant, now known as Omicron, appears to be more easily transmitted from person to person. And the US right now is just reeling from the Delta variant. Actually, Delta variant is still circulating pretty widely in the United States right now. And so this right here is a picture, a 3D picture of Delta, which is on the left side, and Omicron, which is on the right side. So, as I said, a lot of international alarms over the past weeks have been sounded, and I'm sure you've heard them. So let me show you why with these pictures. So the structure of Delta, which I said was on the left, you can see these red and green and kind of cyan color lumps all over it. These are mutations. When you look at Omicron on the right, it has far more mutations than Delta. And on top of that, the area where they're really concentrated, which is right on top, kind of like sprinkles, is known as the spike protein, carries 2/3 of the protein, or 2/3 of these mutations. And this is where a lot of our vaccines are targeted towards, is this area where there are these heavy amount of mutations. And so this is what is leading scientists to be concerned that it can hide from the immune response generated by the vaccine. And so, of course, this has provoked our anxieties. I mean, we're still trying to recuperate from the last 2 years, let alone a new variant that could, concern us and, evade our current vaccines or even natural immunity that we might have. So questions I have, is it covered by vaccines? Does natural immunity offer protection? Who is getting infected? Should I get a booster? Is a new vaccine coming? What should I do with my kids? Should I make travel plans? And just when is there going to be more information? So very briefly, I will answer these. I won't dive into too much depth, but a lot of that is because we don't have all the answers yet for all of these. So, information that we just received today is that it is covered by vaccines. So there's early evidence that really just came out, I think yesterday or even early this morning, that 2 shots of the Pfizer vaccine might not be enough in the face of Omicron, but a 3rd dose, so this booster dose that we have been encouraged to get, actually can neutralize the virus. And so this provides much more support to the idea that everyone should be encouraged to get a 3rd booster dose. And so then the next question is, does natural immunity offer protection? So natural immunity has been tested already, and it is diminished in its ability to protect against Omicron. So while we don't know the percentage of those who are vaccinated versus those who are unvaccinated in terms of who's being infected by Omicron in South Africa or elsewhere, we do know that those who have had previous infection and no vaccine can be reinfected, and or it seems like they might be more likely to be reinfected. And so this leads to the question of who's getting infected. And, the short answer is we don't quite know yet. We don't have enough information, or we need lots and lots of numbers to find that out. And I think that's information that's going to come out in the upcoming weeks. And so we'll have more precision in our response to, how many people are getting reinfected that are vaccinated versus unvaccinated versus, people who are over the age of 65 or under, or children. And so that information is still coming forward. So a next common question is, should I get a booster? So as I've said before, it is absolutely recommended. And with this new information, it definitely is. That sort of strengthens that recommendation. And so for many reasons too. So while the protection may be diminished after 2nd dose, the 3rd dose does create more antibodies that can help neutralize the Omicron virus. And also, we still have Delta circulating. We do know that the vaccines do wane in their protection over time. So getting a booster to, further combat Delta and some of these earlier variants is also very important. Is there a vaccine coming for Omicron? Yes, reportedly, some of the pharmaceutical companies are creating a booster for that. I would not wait around for that booster. It'll take, they're estimating about 100 days. So when you take about 100 days to make, plus whatever is required to manufacture and distribute, we're looking at 4 to 6 months. And I wouldn't wait. So, what should you do with your kids? I think the biggest thing is to get them vaccinated, which is, what we'll go over here. I don't think that boosters have been approved for children yet, but getting them their first 2 doses. And also just sort of the general public health recommendations of masking and, being aware of where you travel to, both for your children as well as anybody else who could be exposed if your family or, some of your children may be carrying the virus themselves. And should I make travel plans? I think in general, with caution and with safety, make sure you get tested before you go anywhere. Make sure everyone that you see is on board, with getting these testing, wear a mask, try to get everyone to be vaccinated, receive their booster in particular. I think avoiding international travel right now would be advised, just because it's difficult to know how international travel policies will be impacted. Okay. Oh,
Dr. Shepherd, before we move on to the next slide, we have a question that maybe we addressed before. We have a question from Anito here. What is it known about transition by vaccinated people? It seems like that it takes place, please correct if I'm wrong. So I think this is a question referring to transmissions by vaccinated people.
Are we talking about Omicron?
We can clarify. Are you referring to Omicron or all vaccinated people? You can go ahead and
for the previous variants. Yeah, so I think so with Omicron, that's difficult to answer because we don't have a lot of information on quite yet on whether this is primarily occurring with unvaccinated, vaccinated, a mix of both. So, that's sort of to be determined. I think the safest bet is just assume that everybody's transmitting it and just follow the proper public health precautions. In terms of other variants, because we do know that, people do get vaccinated and they can still spread the virus, they carry it in their nose. So these vaccines, they protect us. It's important to note that they protect us from severe disease and they're protective against death or severe disease requiring hospitalization or death, but they clearly don't necessarily prevent transmission. And that's something that scientists are still working on. So the coronavirus, it infects our nose and the back of our throat, before making its way down to the airways. And we're still looking for the best way to have these early defenses in our nose and, the back of our throats to really to be strengthened by the vaccines. And so we haven't quite figured out either the right combination of vaccines to do that, or, maybe even a different type of vaccine that could do that. And so until then, these vaccines just protect us from the worst of the disease, but don't fully halt transmission. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like, for instance, this is absolutely an example, but, one possibility is that maybe we will do an intranasal vaccine. Maybe it's possible that would provide a stronger early immune response in the nose or in the upper airways, and then combine that with these mRNA vaccines. Those are the type of considerations that we're making, but at the moment, we do know that it'll be transmitted. I don't know. I think it can be assumed with some of the data that people who are vaccinated are less likely to don't have as much of a burden of the virus, to transmit. So if you're vaccinated and you wear a mask, you're absolutely less likely to transmit it. Certainly if you're unvaccinated and carry it, you're more likely, I think that the data does suggest that you are more likely to transmit it to others. But a mask is still encouraged because that decreases that risk quite a bit.
Great, thank you. And we have a follow-up, one more follow-up. Have they actually tested vaccinated people to be carrying the virus, or is it just a theory?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. I think in terms of people, I would have to look, and I'm not aware of any data of people who are carrying the virus that are vaccinated. I think that that's in theory, but what we do know is that in animal models, so this kind of goes towards the more scientific end, that was tested. And prior to testing in humans, we knew that some vaccines were able to sterilize the virus in the upper airways and others were not. So I think based on that information, putting it into humans, that's in theory, but I don't think that has been explicitly tested in humans, at least not that I'm aware of.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shepherd. That's all we have. So we can go ahead.
Okay. I'm trying to get these slides moving forward. There we go. All right, so moving on to boosters. I'll move through this a little bit quickly so that way we certainly have time for children. One quick question is, how long do the vaccines last? So boosters, like I said, are a hot topic right now, and even hotter now that we know that Omicron can possibly be overcome with a third booster. So the biggest reason, though, that prior to Omicron, why boosters were being pushed is that vaccines have lost their strength with time. So these graphs look at people who received the vaccination who who had prior infection and then received the vaccination after being infected, and then those who received the vaccination only with no infection. So what we've learned with time, as you can see on the left side, is that those who had an infection and then got vaccinated really have this sort of super immunity. It's almost like a superpower. You can see right here that their antibodies, like I said, this is not for meant to go into details for a scientific audience, but in general, the antibodies that they were testing in this particular assay diminish over time. It does that much more slowly in people who did have prior infection and then receive the vaccine. And in fact, in Europe, it is recognized that those who have had prior infection and just had one dose of a vaccine rather than two, they are considered to be fully vaccinated. And so that's a topic that is under debate in the United States, but I think that logistics has made it more difficult for the United States to recognize one shot after prior infection to be fully vaccinated. So they recommend two. But what this shows, more importantly, is that everybody should get vaccinated, regardless of whether they've had the infection or not. That natural immunity plus vaccination together is actually really potent. And like I said, could almost be a superpower, in the midst of this pandemic. Certainly vaccination provides strong response, and you can see that over a 6-month time period, that definitely decreases. And so booster is even more important. We're still, over the next 6 months, we're going to get more data on, how long these antibody responses last after the third booster. And so that's information that has yet to be determined. Okay, and so the question of natural immunity, and I'll go quick through this, but what we do know is that it can decay within about 90 days. So this is natural immunity without any vaccination after it. So immunity from COVID-19 vaccines has been shown to last longer. So both Pfizer and Moderna reported strong vaccine protection for at least 6 months. So one study compared natural immunity alone to natural immunity plus vaccination, and they found that unvaccinated people are 2.34 times likelier to get COVID-19 again than those who are fully vaccinated. So it's still important for everyone. And I won't belabor this more, but it's absolutely recommended to get a booster shot. And this is a question that I also went over is, will there be a new booster for Omicron? So like I said, scientists are currently in action to create this, but don't wait for this booster. I think that we have enough information that a booster with Pfizer and, potentially Moderna, even though we don't have that information yet, could overcome Omicron. And so I think, going back to the tools that we have using our current arsenal is the best thing that we can do right now. And then finally, I think one question that will come up now, especially with the confusion of boosters is, can we mix and match? And mixing matching is okay. So the CDC has said it is safe for people to get a booster shot that is different from the vaccines they originally received. And so this is directly encouraged for those who received Johnson & Johnson originally. They should get a Moderna or Pfizer vaccine to really make their vaccine immune response potent. So while more data is coming out for adults, Moderna does seem to have an edge with reducing hospitalizations and death. More information is coming out, but I think that right now that's where the information and science are pointing towards. So the main point here is that, regardless of what you got the first time or even the second time, getting a booster dose with either of them is an excellent choice and is something you should move forward with. Okay, so I know we just had questions, but any questions on boosters before we moved on to childhood vaccines?
We have one question on natural immunity. Is there scientific data for natural immunity losing the antibody, or is that also a theory?
Yeah, so I hate to wade into this. It's actually pretty murky waters, and there's a tremendous amount of controversy around the role of natural immunity. So I appreciate the question a lot, but that in itself could be a very long conversation and even a long debate. And so I apologize to dodge the question. I would love to, provide my own opinion, give this honest response, but I do think that it is a controversial topic. So, and maybe, if this is one of the scientists, at Walter Reed or at Henry M. Jackson Foundation doing this, maybe this is a topic that we can look at in more granular detail scientifically at some point in the future. But I think, sort of the broad brushstrokes of what we're seeing from a public health perspective is that, vaccines provide very strong immediate benefit in, the natural immunity amplified by vaccines seems to be the best option overall for anybody. If somebody's lucky enough to recover from COVID and then to get the vaccine, they're in the best position, to have the strongest immunity, more so than those with vaccines alone or natural immunity alone.
Yeah, we have another question about natural immunity, but as you've said, I think maybe the community engagement team would think about doing another session on addressing some of the questions that are burning when it comes to natural immunity.
Yeah, I think it's actually I think it gets underappreciated, like how good, how good those questions are about natural immunity. Sometimes it can be waved off by hands, and there's actually a lot of debate about that. I think the safest and best thing to do is to follow what the public health authorities are saying, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of avid discussion. And, for those who are interested, I think it would be a great topic to explore further and discuss. Like I said, it could be an entire topic on its own.
Right, and we'll be sure, as always, we're always exploring, burning questions and topics that we can address within the community. And this seems to be a topic that's coming up often. So we'll be sure to put it on our list of topics that we're going to explore in our next Ask the Expert session. So we can go ahead and move on to the next slide now. And I know we still have a lot to get through. So thank you for all these great questions. Keep them coming.
Yeah. So going through vaccines for children. So this is the most important topic. And I think for those who want to look at the very fine details of the studies that are supporting vaccines for children, those are references that I can provide. Actually, our chief medical officer at Henry M. Jackson Foundation did a wonderful presentation. And so I think for people who want those kind of those primary resources so that they can develop their own opinion, that's something that we can ask of him if we can share. But in terms of sort of like the broad brushstrokes, including childhood vaccination, Children's ages 5+ in the United States can now be vaccinated against COVID-19. So children age 5+, like I said, can now receive Pfizer. The other vaccines have yet to be authorized to be used in children this age. But we do know that vaccination, along with other preventative measures, can protect children from COVID-19. And so using these safe and effective vaccines are already recommended for teenagers and adults in the United States. So similar to what was seen in adult vaccination trials, vaccination was nearly 91% effective in preventing COVID-19 against children ages 5 to 11. And the vaccine side effects were mild, they're self-limiting, and similar to those that were seen in adults and with other recommended and with teenagers as well. And I think another important point is for those that are age 5 to 11, the dose that is being used is actually 1/3 of the dose of what is being used in adults and teenagers. And so, a common question that comes up is that if kids are at low risk for getting COVID-19, why should they be vaccinated? So as you can see here, over the last few months, children have been estimated to have a greater number of infections than adults. And so this is what's being detected in the blood. In terms of, people who have, seroconverted in the blood, I think it's known that some people do, some people don't. And so this is just an estimate. But what we do know is that, over the course of the late summer, that children actually had a higher seroprevalence in the blood than adults had. And so children are absolutely a source of the disease. And so while it may be rare for them to be hospitalized with a multi-systemic inflammatory disease or even have death occur, first, whether it's rare or not, we certainly don't want that to happen to any child. But also, I think another part of it is that it helps protect them. It helps protect them so that they can see other people in their lives, so that they can see grandparents, so that they can see aunts, uncles, so that you can reduce disruptions to in-person learning and activities. By helping curb the community transmission. And so that's a very important part to vaccinating children, both for themselves as well as for the greater good of the community at large. And so, as I said, the dose for those who are 12 to 17 years old is the same as the adult dose. But for children 5 to 11, the dose is 1/3 of that. And it's still 91% effective in studies. And so, as I said, side effects of children that they're experiencing are very similar to adults. And, even some reports have said that they are maybe a little bit less than what adults. So you can expect that the first vaccination, maybe they'll have some arm pain, possibly some fatigue or headaches, but it's really the second vaccination that they'll get the brunt of the symptoms, where they might get fevers, they might get chills, they'll have, possibly more severe arm pain or headaches or fatigue. And so that's very similar to what we've seen in adults. And so going into this in a little more detail, I think expected side effects that you can see is, the local side effects. You can see redness, you can see swelling. Pain has been a very common concern at the injection site for children. Systemically, like I said, same as adults, where you can get fevers, fatigue, headaches, chills. They're probably not going to be feeling very good. They'll probably feel pretty crummy in the day or two after getting their second dose. And so, giving either Tylenol or Motrin to help out with these symptoms is appropriate. And then, of course, for children, remember not to give aspirin because we want to avoid Ray's syndrome. And so then the question about myocarditis. So, this is a rare side effect. So in Pfizer's phase 3 trial for children, particularly 5 to 11, this actually didn't come up in anybody because it's rare. So that being said, it does come up because we are going to be vaccinating more people than what are in the trial. So what we do know is that the risk is highest in males, so 12 to 29 years old, so not just adolescents, but also young adults as well. And the information that we have had is that it is that it is self-limiting. So it is something that might occur for a couple of days, and then it does resolve with conservative therapy. So with Motrin, with rest, with fluids. And it is also generally mild. Take that in comparison to the same type of heart inflammation that you can get with COVID. You're much more likely to get this heart inflammation with COVID. And it's also more likely to last longer and produce stronger symptoms. Things that you should worry about that could present concern would be chest pain, shortness of breath, or if they're feeling a little bit of a fluttering in their heart. And so just a few days ago, for ages 5 to 11, we do have a cohort study that came up that did describe this as being similar to children and young adults aged 12 to 29. So this type of information and counseling can be used for that age group as well. And of course, I think that my biggest recommendation, because in the case studies that we did see for myocarditis, it was in young athletes or active children who, after they received the vaccine, they're feeling okay, and or even COVID, they're feeling okay, but then they start activity too quickly. So I think that the best recommendation to be safe is that after that second vaccine in particular, is to rest for a couple of days, not try too hard. Even if they start feeling better, just take it easy. Because like I said, this is viewed as being mild and transient, but activity could exacerbate that at point, and that's not something that we would want. And so, taking all the information together, what the authorities and the experts reviewing this information have thought is that the benefits of the COVID-19 vaccination outweigh the risk of this in the population. And in particular, like I said, because COVID itself can cause myocarditis, or this heart inflammation, and to a much worse extent that lasts longer and more commonly as well. Okay, and so can other vaccines be given with the COVID-19? The answer is absolutely. So the COVID-19 vaccine should not disrupt the routine child vaccination schedule. In fact, it can be administered on the same day. So that's not something that is going to change anything for those children. And so once again, going back to the children, if children are low risk, why should they get the vaccine? And once again, I think this goes, even a rare risk. I can imagine as a parent that you would want to lower your kid's risk of any severe disease or hospitalization to any extent. So that's one reason, but also, so the kids can see other people in the community, whether it's their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, or anybody else who might visit. Certainly we see a lot of cases where grandparents visit their grandchildren, and they not only get a cold from their grandkids, but now they're getting COVID from their grandkids. And so to keep everybody healthy and to keep everyone safe, it's important to encourage vaccination. Okay, so I know that was brief, but I'm curious if there are any questions.
We have a few.
Okay.
Before we jump into the questions, I think we're going to be at least 5 minutes over the scheduled time. So if you guys must leave at 1, we'll be sharing the recording with you via email. I also encourage you all to complete an evaluation, which we will send in that email. So we can go ahead and go into the question. So we have a question on effect on mRNA vaccines on puberty.
Yeah, I don't think that we have any long-term data on that. But, looking at experts who are guiding the CDC through this information, it's not expected to impact puberty. And the primary reason is because we don't see these long-term effects in adults or in adolescents. So, in the 17 or 18 years. And so it's not expected to do that. And kind of going back to the conversation before about how briefly the mRNA vaccines actually stay in the body, they're only really in there for a matter of days. It's not expected to impact puberty. I can't support that with data, but it's going to take years for that kind of data to come around.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Ines. And we have another one. Would taking ibuprofen following vaccine doses for symptoms stun the immunity response?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've actually wondered that myself. But I think that's a possibility. And not a bad question. I don't think that has been explored. I think what you'd have to do is kind of go back into the literature and, look how that has impacted either other vaccines or other or during other infections. But I think, for me personally, so I actually had COVID about a year ago now, and this was like a week prior to when I got the vaccine. And so even after COVID or even after the vaccine, because I had very strong side effects after the vaccine because I had COVID first, I think the discomfort was enough that, I think that I decided that I'd prefer to have, a few fever-free days and, muscle pain. So I think that's a personal choice, but that's an excellent question. And certainly if somebody's taking any type of immunosuppressant drug like prednisone or other types of steroids or immune modulators, that would also be a similar concern, but I can't say for sure to what extent.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions we have so far. As I've said, if you guys have other commitments and you have to go, we can share the recording with you of the rest of the presentation. I do highly encourage you, though, to complete that evaluation form because it really does help us structure our programming for the future. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. There is a lot about that comes from myths and misconceptions. And I think, I saw that we have a social worker amongst us. I'm sure we have some nurses amongst us as well. And so I don't think we will have time today to go over these, but with the presentation being sent around, I do encourage you to look through these because this could kind of answer some of the questions you might have. And I'll leave my notes in the text box as well so that you can read what my response would be to these. But this kind of helps you address some concerns that people might have or even some concerns that you might have. And there should be links there as well to provide you with articles with more information that you can look at. And so this, answers questions about, whether COVID-19 vaccines modify your DNA, where's the information to support that, how can we trust pharmaceutical companies and those types of concerns that usually come up. Certainly amongst pregnant women or women who are expected to become pregnant in the next year. There have been lots of questions about its impact on infertility, if they do have a newborn and they're breastfeeding, how that could do, and that information is here too. As a primer is that it is safe in pregnant women and antibodies even go in breast milk, which is great for a newly born infant, but I will let you look into that further. So as I said, that information will be given to you. And, I really appreciate the community engagement team. There's a lot of activity that's going on Walter Reed. The biggest thing that I encourage people is to kind of dip their toes into clinical research. Clinical research can mean a lot of different things. It does not by any means mean that you, have to show up and get injected with an experimental vaccine or even take a medicine. It can be as simple as getting involved with an exercise study, or you can even be a healthy control that doesn't do anything in certain scenarios. But just kind of understanding what the process is of how scientists and health physicians and people collect this kind of information to serve the broader public health. So with that, I wish everyone the best and thank you so much for your time and listening.
Thank you so much. I do have one question. You touched on research and community getting engaged with research. This is a program that we put together in partnership with GW. So we might have students who might be interested in participating in some of the studies, like you said, we have going on. So what is one that we have right now that's going on that people can get and, participate in? I think we have one that's yellow fever. And if people are interested in engaging in that, what can they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing that people are interested, I'd ask them to contact you, actually, because so if you are interested or curious in a clinical trial, so Basil's correct, we do have a yellow fever vaccine trial coming up. So the reason why a yellow fever vaccine is needed is because the stockpiles dwindle very quickly worldwide. And then places in Africa and South America, Central America, they just don't have enough vaccine. So another one is being made that can be produced quickly and can be used. And so we're testing that right now at Walter Reed. And we would absolutely love, if someone is interested in exploring that, for you to come by and either learn more or to participate. And so I'd encourage you to reach out to Beza if that's the case.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Brittany, for doing a stellar job in presenting this information for our audience. I also want to thank the audience that stayed with us for the great questions, for the engagement. We're going to be able to share all these wonderful PowerPoints and the recording. I highly encourage you to please, my colleague Jael has shared an evaluation link. Please take a moment to complete it. As I've said earlier, the community engagement team is doing ongoing education within the community and internally as well. So take a moment to complete that and also tell us what you would be interested in terms of topics for future programming. In terms of what's to come, we have a couple of events in January that we'll be able to share with you soon. With that said, I know some of you are joining us as a group. So if you want to be added to our distribution list so you can get information on our future programming, please reach out to me or any of my CE colleagues so we can add you to that list. And that's all. Thank you all so much for being here with us. And I'm going to go ahead and end this webinar in a count of 3, 2, 1.